value strength as being synonymous with invulnerability, today we are going to challenge that notion. We are going to spend some time exploring the power of vulnerability and showing up as your true, authentic self, and how that can bring benefits, not only in terms of personal growth, but also in terms of your connections and making deeper connections with other people.
This is a really fascinating area to explore, that there paradoxically is actually strength in acting with vulnerability.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily associate it. We tend to associate vulnerability with weakness.
Yeah.
And people go to great lengths to avoid that weakness. And what we really want to talk about in this podcast is how your willingness to step into or demonstrate vulnerability actually creates quite the opposite and demonstrates real strength as a leader. We're going to have a look at how vulnerability isn't rather than a weakness, actually can become a strength. We're going to look at how this actually can build your resilience, strengthen your resilience to be a better and stronger leader or an individual contributor. And thirdly, how vulnerability in the workplace and actually can lead to much higher trusting relationships and an environment where people have much higher degrees of safety, psychological safety, to be able to learn together and grow and build as a team.
Yeah.
So it really does have a significant impact. If you can adopt this as a leader, in particular, it really can make quite a significant difference to what it's like to be on the receiving end of you as a leader.
Yeah.
If you are willing first yourself to demonstrate vulnerability.
And I think, it's worth expressing what we mean by vulnerability. And it's really about showing up as your whole self, sort of a little bit of warts and all, rather than portraying this perfect image of what we think other people want to see
and hear.
Which is unrealistic, because we're all human and we all know that nobody is perfect. Nobody really is perfect. So if you try and portray a perfectionist image, it's not real, is it? And
in fact, it does quite the opposite, doesn't it? Because if you see somebody trying to be something they're not, and they are not that person, but they're trying to project an image, what does it cause us to do?
Yeah.
The first thing it causes us to do is to mistrust them.
Yeah. Question motives.
Yeah. What's your motive here?
What are you hiding?
And what else are you saying that is an untruth?
Yeah.
Because you're trying to paint this shiny, glossier version of yourself. So it absolutely contributes to lower levels of trust. And that's, as I said before, it's a paradox, isn't it? You would think that actually demonstrating some vulnerability, admitting you don't know the answer, would actually cause people to trust you less or not to have so much confidence in you. But it does quite the opposite. And it's very much the same whether you're leading people or indeed whether you're working with clients.
Yeah.
If you're we do a lot of work in the world of winning business. And if you're trying to pretend to a client that you've never made a mistake, nothing has ever gone wrong, it just makes clients more suspicious, because it just sounds unbelievable, and it is unbelievable.
And it's a highly stressful position from which to operate from as well. So what we're talking about is showing up as your true, authentic self, irrespective of the judgment or challenge that you might face. It's being true to your values and showing up authentically in a real
And when you say the point around stress, are you talking about it's stressful for the leader?
I think it's stressful to try and be something that you're not.
Yeah.
It
requires a lot of conscious effort.
Yeah.
All the time.
And that's when the fear of getting found out and all of the stress associated with that comes in. So being yourself and being willing to be vulnerable has benefits for you, but massive, massive benefits in terms of the connection that you are able to have with others.
And one of the things that increasingly employees want from their leaders is greater levels of authenticity. The pandemic certainly demonstrated this.
Yeah.
And actually, I have to say that a lot of leaders did a great job during that time. Some did not, but the ones that did really gained a great deal from their teams.
I think that one way that people were able to show vulnerability, I mean, even newsreaders on the TV, there's loads of examples, isn't there, with a baby coming in on a baby walker, all those were vulnerable, real moments that gave us an insight into the real lives, not the curated lives of other people. And it's the same in the workplace, whether you're a leader or somebody working within a team. It's hugely powerful.
And engenders, we relate to it resonates with people connected with it. We talked about social media on previous occasions, and of course social media presents the most polished, perfect version of ourselves. No one puts up images of looking scraggy and rough and beaten up and on a bad day, or no one publicises their failures. Everyone's publishing their perfect lives and their perfect success and their perfect holiday, and of course that engenders this feeling of I can't present anything other than perfect.
Yeah, but when you do find accounts that are a bit more real, I mean, I follow loads of other mums, and there's quite a few fantastic accounts where people are willing to be, and they don't put all their makeup on and get all perfectly ready before they go on camera. They literally, some of them actually just open their eyes in the morning and press record. And being willing to be vulnerable, the engagement that they get from
it's much more
people
believable.
they don't even know
is
so much more powerful. So it's powerful all round. But it's interesting. See, what would stop us from being ourselves in the first place? And what stops us from having some sort of shame around being vulnerable?
Well, of course, one of the main authorities on this subject is the lovely Brené Brown, and she's just absolutely brilliant and a real authority on this subject, highly intelligent, done some amazing research.
Yeah.
And that comes across in her talks and her speeches as well. And she talks a lot about the word courage. It's the lack of courage, or in the positive, courage to admit you are wrong, to admit you don't know, to the willingness to want to ask for help. That little bit of vulnerability in those moments enables you to build a much higher level of trust with people. Yeah,
she calls it the most accurate measure of courage is the willingness to be vulnerable. And I think that
as opposed to what we traditionally think about is being strong, going for it. So there's one, you showed great courage in there, you went for it, you were super strong. Well, this is the opposite, isn't it? It's actually the courage to be weak.
I think sometimes it's our conditioning around the need to keep ourselves safe that limits our ability to be vulnerable. So we think that we have to portray that strong exterior image and get everything right and be seen as that sort of got it all together type individual in order to be successful. But, as Brené Brown and others have shown, it is the exact opposite of that.
No, of course, we're not proposing that you go around every day talking about your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities. I don't know this, I need help with that. We're not talking about that.
She calls it, I think it was Brené, that she called it, it's not about emotionally vomiting.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Not emotionally vomiting. Exactly. Yeah. So it's, proportionate, obviously, but think about what the opposite of this is. Patrick Lencioni, who I'm a big fan of, and his wonderful little book, Fable, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, where he talks about the lack of trust in an organisation or in a team leads to a lack of willingness for people to demonstrate any vulnerability, a lack of willingness to talk about things that might be conflicting ideas. Rather, what happens is that you get this sort of what he calls artificial harmony, where teams are pretending to agree with each other. They are pretending to go along with a leader because nobody's got the confidence to stand up and disagree.
Yeah.
Or have the courage to do that. So you end up with a team that supposedly on the surface is agreeing with each other. But then what immediately happens is that as soon as that team leaves that room, they go and have a separate conversation with somebody else and say, well, that was a lot of BS, wasn't it? I mean, no one's ever going to do that. We've all agreed to something that nobody's actually ever going to do.
And that we see that time and time again.
We see it a lot.
That they say, yeah, I'm signing up to that, in the room, absolutely signing up to that, never to be seen again.
Yeah. and a large part of that is actually the leader then complains about it. But the leader has actually in some way contributed to the result they don't want. I mean, I'm working with an organisation at the moment where the leader is continually frustrated at the lack of responsibility of some of his team members to follow through on commitments that they've made. Really, when we get down to it, why do they make that commitment in the first place? Well, they made that commitment in the full knowledge, in truth, they were never going to be able to achieve that task, but they didn't have the confidence or they didn't feel safe to be able to say, I just don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
So you end up signing up to things that they've got real no chance of doing, and they're just happy to ride it out at the time, make all sorts of excuses up because everyone else is doing the same, quite frankly. And so therefore they just get used to it. We set a goal, we supposedly agree to committing to that goal, but no one really is signing up to it in truth. And then at a later point, we find that we can't produce the results we said we were going to do. But because it's so common that everyone's just got used to that lower level of performance.
And I think that you've hit a good point, because I think it's a leader can set the tone for vulnerability, can't they? If a leader is willing to be vulnerable and willing to share when they've made a mistake or ask for help or admit that they need some assistance in some area, then others are much more willing to do the same. If a leader portrays themselves as this perfect specimen, then the individuals that are working within that team will not feel comfortable. The environment won't be created that they feel comfortable to share limitations, and they might even, they might even portray the false, everything's fine here, and there's a big issue for the organisation rumbling underneath.
Many authors, researchers speak to this concept of going first and demonstrating vulnerability first. Patrick Lencioni, who I mentioned a few moments ago, he said the key is for the leader to go first. If the leader admits they don't know, or the leader demonstrates vulnerability, it enables other people to follow.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, isn't it? The way the psychology works here is if we demonstrate a little bit of vulnerability, as human beings, exception of the few, we don't seek to crush those people. We do the opposite. We actually want to rescue them. You wrap your arms around them. You say, "Oh, I can help with that."
Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate you. I appreciate, by the way, you sharing that thought or that belief or that concern and honesty.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. It's natural for us actually to want to support them. So Simon Sinek says something quite similar, doesn't he?
Yeah. In his book Leaders Eat Last, he says that leaders that are willing to show vulnerability establish an environment of trust and connection.
Yeah. And I could think of another, Jim Collins, who in his very famous books, Built to Last, Good to Great, in that study, the study was why certain organisations outperform the counterparts. Yeah. And over that 50-year study, he wasn't necessarily looking for leadership to be one of the factors, but what emerged is what he described as level 5 leaders. And there were two clear standout traits of these level 5 leaders. Firstly, it was a sort of steadfast will to want to achieve. But the second was this ability to have humility.
Yeah.
The willingness to listen to other people, the willingness to demonstrate vulnerability, the willingness to reach out, not pretend you know all the answers yourself. So it's kind of what in our language we might describe as one one sense is strength.
Yes.
And then the other side is warmth, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's that. And that makes you a much more rounded, it's more of a real human
absolutely.
being.
That is the word.
We are full of fears. Everybody's full of fear. Everybody has got trepidations and concerns. And, you know, I do not know. I've worked with thousands of leaders over the years. And even the boldest, biggest, bravest leaders, when it gets down to it, when you get into conversations with them, which I've had the privilege to do, every single one of them to a T, they all have their own fears, all have their concerns, but they've learned to manage them.
Yeah.
And they rather than hide them, the best, not always, but the very best, learn to embrace that.
Yeah.
And they utilize it.
And you know, sometimes, you know, in the conversations that we have with people, they share their vulnerabilities with us, but don't realise that is, until after the session, they don't realise that that is the key to the connection that they're seeking, you know, with their teams. They think it's something that has to be only discussed behind closed doors. And I think the other thing that's important to reflect on, you know, I'm sure a lot of the listeners are parents as well, and it's really important in terms of in parenting, you know, children, that parents, in the same way that leaders show vulnerability, parents must show their vulnerability as well. Because if we as parents portray this, we got it all together, stiff upper lip, then our children won't learn resilience. Our children won't explore the ability to be open and honest with their emotions and develop as an emotionally intelligent human being, and will limit their own connections, you know, with other people. So I think
lowers
it's so
their
important.
emotional intelligence, doesn't it? The ability to demonstrate empathy, understanding, being compassionate with other people. And having coached, you know, hundreds of leaders, and when you get beneath the surface as to why does somebody behave in this way, and the question I would ask is, what prevents you from demonstrating, you know, this vulnerability? You were talking about it earlier with leaders. When I ask them that question, it often comes back to the fact that they weren't able to, you know, demonstrate any weakness to their father or indeed their mother. It could be either way, but they're learning it from their parents. It's not good to do. You always have to show that you know, can succeed and that you shouldn't show any sign of weakness. They then inadvertently, one, as you say, are passing it on to their kids, but they're also passing it on to the people they're leading. Yes. And this makes it very, very difficult for people to come to them and admit they don't know, or admit they, or you know, they want to ask for help for fear of being chastised for not knowing the answer. Yeah, it just limits connection on every level. I was having this conversation recently in someone in a coaching session, and they were, like you said, they were demonstrating some quite high degrees of vulnerability with me, and they were, you know, clearly quite upset about certain things and the way they've been treated. And I said to them, so who have you shared with this so far? Not surprisingly, nobody. Right? And I said, well, what would stop you from doing that? And they led to this whole dialogue around the relationship with their parent or his father. And I said, look, you know, your growth here is not in being perfect. He's looking for answers from me to button up, fasten up, patch over, pull yourself together. And I said, look, you know, let's do the opposite of that. Let's admit that you don't, you know, get there first. Tell people, look, listen, this isn't my strength. I'm not always going to be the best listener. I'm not always going to be the most empathic person. I'm not always going to be the quickest around, you know, with ideas of creativity. And team, this is where I need your help. And sometimes I'll make mistakes. Sometimes I'll cross the line. Sometimes my blindness to my approach causes me to come across as if I'm not listening or I don't care. And actually, it's not the case. And I need you to help me. I mean, how powerful is that? Having that type of conversation makes it okay for someone else not to be perfect. Absolutely. And it's like, you know, the research and the work we do with Zenger Folkman and the research they've done around extraordinary leadership. Well, leaders don't have to be perfect to be extraordinary. Actually,
it's quite good if they're a little bit imperfect, in my view, to be,
or at least willing to demonstrate it, for sure. Yeah, they're not defined by the absence of weakness. Far from it.
Yeah.
They're more likely to be defined by 3 or 4 to profound strengths.
And utilise the strengths in the team.
Yeah.
I mean, how powerful is that?
Yeah. And then therefore you're validating other people's contribution to the team. You're not trying to present yourself as all-encompassing, perfect. And that just freaks people out. It's such a prohibitor to progress if people don't have the psychological safety to be able to come and talk to each other. We talked about the importance of growth mindset before on a previous episode. Again, this is a massive part of it. Is the leader playing their role in creating a culture of safety around learning and making mistakes? What is it? One of my questions in all organizations I work with is, what happens when someone makes a mistake? What is the consequence of it? How is it viewed? Are willing to people take risks? What's causing this risk-averse culture? And inevitably, right at the heart of it, a lot of these mistakes could have been avoided if someone had actually put their hand up in the first place.
Otherwise, it's mistake after mistake after mistake.
So they're covering up. I mean, think about it. That's a lot of financial fraud comes down to that. I mean, they're covering up financial mistakes that then become so big that it's now even monumental. The consequences are monumental of admitting it. Yeah,
I mean the recent post office scandal. I'm sure there was many examples of that. Horrendous
arrogance.
Exactly. It is an arrogant act.
It is an arrogance. Yeah, that's what it is. It's arrogance. The other end of it is, you think about the uglier side of lack of vulnerability is indeed arrogance. Yeah. It's, I can't possibly be me.
No.
In every single way, it is both from a negative and a positive point of view, leaning into finding strength in vulnerability.
Yeah.
It has enormous impact on your team.
And on, measurable business outcomes as well. People will go further for somebody that they feel more connected to. So productivity will increase. I'm sure creativity, people that are in an environment where ideas are openly expressed and, contributions are welcome, that is going to increase creativity. People will stay longer in an environment that they feel comfortable and open and sharing and being themselves, So there's many, many hard business benefits to it as well.
So what are some of the things we can really start to do to engender this feeling of building higher levels of trust and compassion in the team? What can a leader start to do?
I think you've touched on it already, but the main thing is to lead by example. So, creating an environment where there's really open and honest communication, being willing to express maybe partly formed ideas and asking for contribution from other people. Asking for feedback from people is a very courageous and vulnerable act, and then doing something with it.
But there's some, we talked about Zenger Fomen a few moments ago, and they worked with a guy called Kevin Wilder, and he wrote a book around what he calls coachability. And the heart of that book, we all know that it's one thing to coach others or to be even, to be open to coaching. But the one trait that is often missing is the lack of, or the bravery, or the lack of willingness to actually ask for feedback. It's okay you can learn the skill of accepting feedback. So you give me feedback, I can accept it.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, that makes me, I'm a good coachee because when I have coaching sessions, I'm always willing to listen and ask for feedback. But what are you doing as a regular habit of actually seeking feedback from people? This is something that we naturally do in our more junior years. Why? Because, well, quite frankly, you're trying to learn, you're trying to get up the ladder. Nobody is seeing you. It wouldn't seem odd for you to be asking for help. So therefore, it's more common.
Yeah.
as you become more established and you reach more senior positions, what starts to happen is you start to ask for feedback less, and you don't cultivate the views of others. You don't solicit opinions about how you're doing. And this, in fact, lowers your coachability.
Yeah.
So again, it's another factor around if you really get behind why isn't somebody doing that, why they're not asking for feedback, because it demonstrates this lack of vulnerability again. So it can massively contribute to you getting the development that you need in order to continue developing as a leader.
Yeah, and encouraging, others to do the same.
Another author that comes to mind around this subject is Charles Green. And they wrote a book called The Trusted Advisor, where they truly tried to break down the components of trust. And very broadly, it's credibility. So it's what you say and how you say it. Are you knowledgeable in your area? The second is about reliability. Do you actually say what you're going to do? And interestingly enough, those two are much more, you could say, appeal to the more logical side of our brain.
Yeah.
All right. It's facts, figures, numbers, and that's what they really belong to. All right. The other two are more emotional.
Yes.
And that's why I'm bringing them up here. The third is the area of what he describes as intimacy. And he's really interchanging this word with the word safety.
Yeah.
Again, not surprising, another body of research. Safety is the degree to which somebody feels safe in describing something to you, in admitting something. What are the consequences of somebody, or how safe does somebody feel with you as a leader to be able to share that with? And in turn, how willing are you to share something?
Reciprocal.
And reciprocate with that. And then the third area is self-orientation, the degree to which somebody believes that you are doing something for self, for others. This is largely around building trust. Building trust in leadership, but I use it a lot in building trust in business relationships when you're pursuing new clients and things. Again, countless examples here of somebody is selling and they're not willing to admit where their product or their service might come short of what the customers' requirements are. Rather than recommending someone else, they try and pretend they're all things to all people.
Yeah. People can sniff that out.
So detrimental, so detrimental to... if they don't find out that day, they'll find out some later point. What they'll very quickly discover is they put their own needs ahead of the client and therefore immediately lowered their trust. Reaching what they call the trusted advisor status is where, most importantly, these two emotional factors of the ability for somebody to feel safe in your environment, in being able to share things with you that they know that you're not going to repeat to others. They're not going to get come back on. They're not going to be judged by you, but they feel safe in sharing those things with you. And then the last one of actually you're doing something for their needs, not for your own. So there are so many examples here where vulnerability is, as we said, we entitled this podcast "Drawing Strength from Vulnerability." And there is yet another example, particularly in the world of selling.
It is not an easy thing to do, and it does take courage. But the more you, like with anything, the more you exercise that muscle and be willing to open up and express your limitations without fear of judgment, the more you release yourself and release pressure from yourself and deepen the connections with other people.
And the judgment, of course, is all in your own head. You're thinking you're going to get judged.
Well, that's your ego at work, isn't it?
So you're protecting your ego. Exactly. You're protecting your ego. And therefore, the point is, the views you hold of what you think other people will behave is actually your own fear and your own projection. It's actually quite the opposite. So if there's one thing we want you to do, and this is, an act of bravery, an act of courage, the next time you find yourself in those positions, whether it's a personal relationship with your partner, loved ones, with your team, colleagues, friends, etc., be willing to admit where you've got it wrong. And sit in that space and be comfortable with it.
And be an example for others.
Be an example for others and notice how that feels and grow that muscle. We talked about neuroplasticity before, new associations. the more you build up those associations, actually, that was really good. That felt great. You can then start
ask for feedback along the way from people as well. I mean, you don't want to do it in a too much of a contrived way, but, you will learn through the feedback of others the positive impact of this, and it will be positive, guaranteed.
Very enriching, very, very powerful, and actually... paradoxically, again, builds your own confidence. It actually makes you stronger and builds your own resilience. It's really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
It is quite the opposite of what we might think. Rather than sort of putting on this stoic, strong, I can't possibly wrong, I'm not making any mistakes.
Which is exhausting.
It's absolutely exhausting. Lowers your resilience because you know there's an untruth in it all. You're not feeling that great about yourself because you haven't spoken to your truth.
Yeah.
Versus actually having the courage to demonstrate a bit of vulnerability, coming out the other side of that, all right, it grows your resilience. You think, wow, look, I was able to survive that. I've grown from it and I've become stronger for it.
And we've become stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I even at a corporate and organizational level, organizations that admit they're wrong, in the eyes of the consumer, trust grows. I
mean, there's countless examples of that, isn't there, in the media, where directed at the government, but why did they not say this, at the time? We'd be much more willing to feel warmth towards organisations
and compassion.
That, hands up, need to do things differently or got this wrong. So much more connection.
I don't want to start citing examples here, but you can think of major corporations that haven't admitted those faults, and it's crushed their brand. Yeah, and I think that we live in a world where we've got certainly a younger generation coming through that massively appreciate honesty and authenticity. They don't want spin. They want truth. And so they tend to navigate towards those brands that are more trustworthy.
Yeah, they want that connection.
Because they're being real and because they're being honest. So in summary, what we're saying is there's a lot to be gained from, and strength to be gained in multiple ways, by leaning into your own vulnerabilities, admitting your mistakes, asking for help, being more coachable,
being willing to share unpopular ideas.
Yeah, and have the courage of your convictions even when it's not so popular. Yeah. Express those. Be willing to do that. I would really encourage our listeners to practice this by taking some small risks around admitting where you've made mistakes. Do it with your team, with your boss.
Yeah, in meetings. In your share meetings, the idea that you feel vulnerable in sharing, and notice what happens. Share the personal, the real side of you, and notice what happens. It will only be a positive outcome.
So when you feel, shall I not do it? Yeah. And notice the difference. Yeah. Start to build up some positive references that there is strength in vulnerability.
Yeah, both in how you feel yourself and the response and the relationships that you were able to create with other people.
Yeah, and in turn how they will respond with you as well. Yeah. So it's building up some new references around it to change your paradigm and your belief around this important area.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot to be gained. And I actually would really encourage you to read, if that's your preference, or listen to Brené Brown, because she is the real champion on this subject.
Yeah, we'll link the books that we've mentioned and a few other podcasts in the show notes as well. Yeah. And of course, as usual, all of these ideas will be in the handy little power tool available for you to download and share with your family, friends and colleagues.
Yeah, and please do share it with other people. You're giving, again, we always say this, you're giving them the gift of learning, so please do share with other people and let us know what you think. Yeah. So until next time.
Yeah, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.